Okay, so this week we really worked on adding texture to our objects. So I'm going to follow along on those steps um, until I get to the point where I have my textures on my objects, and then I will talk to you about moving forward on the next step. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and then I'll talk to you again here in a minute when I talk about moving on for this week. Okay? Okay. So now that I have this piece, I can kind of set it aside, and that's where I would practice my textures. You should have practiced your textures on a tracing paper, piece of tracing paper. You can practice on computer paper, whatever you want. But we are going to alter three objects. We're going to make three of the objects in our still life a different texture, or make it look like it's made of a different material. So practice the objects that you feel like you're going to alter, or practice all of them, but practice your objects more than once, I would suggest. I would practice textures until you feel confident in applying those textures to the still life in pen. Then, when you feel like you are ready, I would trace some of your objects, or the three objects that you're going to alter on the on tracing paper, or like I said, you can do this on computer paper, really anything that you could just see through a little bit. If you need to put it up against a window, or we have light tables in the classroom, but anything that you can see through it in order to trace the outline of the object. So I'm going to change the texture of this pear. I'm also going to change the texture of this pitcher. I don't know. It's a pitcher, I think. And then I'm going to change the texture of the grapes, okay? So I'm going to be right back. I'm going to go use the light table to alter that texture really quick. So. All right, so I'm back from the light table. I've got my objects that I'm going to alter traced on the tracing paper. And now I'm going to add the grid. I'm going to apply the grid so that I can easily lay my plastic, my acetate over it, and I can use that grid to apply my texture without having to draw the grid on my acetate and Sharpie. So with a pear, it is a circular object, and it's kind of like tilted away from us. So I'm going to make the bottom pretty visible, even though I think that's going to be in shadow. That's going to be kind of where my epicenter of lines kind of radiate from. So there's that, and I'm going to draw my horizontal lines. Remember, it is a curved form, so my grid needs to curve around it. it should follow the form of the pear. So there is one set of lines, and then if this is going to be my epicenter, I can kind of use it to follow. If I start a line right there, I'm going to follow the outside edge of this pear, and it's going to go up, and it's going to kind of curve and flatten as it meets essentially on the other side where I can't really see it. And I'm going to do a few of those. The closer they get to the center, the more straight they are, the more the outside edge, the more curved they will look. The closer they get to the top, the closer they will get together because they converge up there at the edge. So there is my grid for that shape. My grid for the picture is going to, follow the same rules. I drew this line in there because there's a really distinct edge right there where the picture turns into the spout. So I'm going to make sure that I include that. So my lines going up and down are going to follow the curve of the picture. The closer they get together in the center, the more straight they will appear. And then my lines going around horizontally are going to follow the curve of the picture. Now, the top of this picture is really straight because that's exactly where my eye level is. So the further they get down, the more curve is going to appear. So I am going to follow this top edge a little bit, but every line I draw, I'm going to curve it a little bit more so that as it grows, the curve is more apparent. There. Okay? And then this guy, he can kind of have his own little grid as well. So he's going to have lines that curve this way, and they are going to kind of converge because it just gets wider at the top. And then these are going to curve this way. And there's the picture, and then the handle has its own set as well. So I'm going to use this curve to define my curve. Remember, it's as if it was going around the edge. If it helps you for smaller things like this, you can finish that ellipse, if that makes more sense for you. And this is going to curve around, and it's going to start to angle this way because it's turning. So not only are we following the curve of this handle, but we also have to follow the turn of it. And then it disappears into my grape. And then the lines going, the transverse lines are just going to be essentially the same lines as the outer edges of this. It's such a small shape, so it doesn't need a whole lot of lines going that direction, but there is my grid for the picture. And then for the grapes, it's very similar to the pear. You want lines that are going around the shape. I am only going to do the grapes, so I'm not going to do the stems, and I'm not going to do the Now, not all of these grapes are shaped exactly the same, but the grid line is going to be very similar for all of them. Some of them are facing in and out, so I'm paying attention to that as I am creating my grid as well. So actually, this is on the other side, so I'm going to ignore that because this grape in my picture is tilted away from me, so I'm not going to see that epicenter. This grape, I see like essentially the bottom of it, so it's going to look like this, kind of like a bullseye. And then these back here that are like barely there, what I would suggest is if something is covering it, you still have to pretend like it is whole when you draw your grid. So I'm still going to draw my grid as if I could see the whole thing, even though I really can't. Like this one back here is going to be very minor, very small. Okay? And then we got some more. When you have objects that are repetitive like this, you just want to make sure that the grids don't seem to morph together. And I really do just start at the bottom of these grids because it has such a great shape to inform the way the grid is going to build on itself. So like this one back here, I think is going to be difficult to see. And then we've got these up here. And you can't see the bottom, so I started from the top on that one. This is mostly covered up by the stem, but I still need to get some information. All right, so there is my grid. Now I can really easily just lay my paper or my acetates back over the top of my tracing paper, line it up, and apply my texture the same way we applied texture to our spheres and cubes in class or in our practice, in our sketchbook, and I can just do it. I know I can see my grid, and I can go ahead and follow that form for my texture. So I'm going to do that now. I will put this in a quick speed, and then I will come back here in just a little bit to show you what the next step is. So this is what we've been working on this week. I do want to pause here and talk about one thing with our textures, and that is to remember that it is important to break the edge. So even though that we have drawn a very hard outline on our object, I'm going to ignore that outline as I come to the edge with my textures because it's going to end up blending into our texture and our values anyway, but we don't want it to be such a direct, hard edge when we are trying to create these textures. That's part of what makes the textures believable and realistic, is that the edges are broken and organic, okay? So even though we've drawn a hard outline, don't adhere strictly to that outline when you're applying your texture, okay? Okay. Okay. So notice I didn't do a whole lot of I'm doing for hair on the grapes because I'm going to do a lot of that as I chop down the lines from the shape of the value. So right now I just have my texture. I'm going to go in now and kind of overlay some value. So with most of your textures, your value work is just going to be line work or hatch marks over the top of what you've already done. But like with the hair, hatch marks and hair are very similar. So I didn't apply a whole lot of the texture because the texture is going to end up being uh, more closely related to the value information. So I'm going to get you a little bit closer so you can see, and I'm going to start with the grapes. So I put it back over the top of my picture. Your guys' images should be in black and white, so you should really be able to see the value information well. So like this guy over here, remember every object has shadows and highlights, and see his highlights right there. So I'm going to add a little bit more kind of in here, but following the direction of the ones that I've already got because I wanted to follow the form. And remember, the lines that I already have on here are there because of the grid underneath it or the form underneath it. I'm going to darken that one back there because he's behind. This guy is not really that dark back here behind here, but I am going to darken a little bit like on this edge here. And then this guy gets pretty dark, so I'm going to go ahead and add some more lines there. This guy is pretty dark, except we got this nice highlight up here at the top. So I'm going to add some more markings towards the bottom. Really kind of blend that in and give it a nice gradation so it looks like it's round and fading. And the same thing over here, but I'm going to do it from the side for this guy. I'm not going to add any more to that edge over there. To this side. This guy's got some shadows in here. Add a little bit of that hair there. Got some shadows too. Yeah, in the middle and on this edge. Like that. Part alone. This guy needs some more on the bottom. He's the one I'm looking at, the butt of the berry is the grape. So all of his are going to go angled into the center, at the center, which I'm going to add a little bit of value to as well. We're really light over here, so I'm going to add some more around the outside there. And then a little bit on this guy where they kind of connect. Okay? I feel like you need more. Okay. All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about the grapes. I can always check my work by removing that picture behind it. I can add a little bit of more if I feel like I need to. Some of them I just need a little bit of definition. So I'm just going to go over that. It's kind of looking like coconuts now. I'm just kind of blending some line work right now. Okay, so I can go back and I can clean that up later with an expo marker or a little bit of, actually a little bit of hand sanitizer on a Q-tip would be really precise, and I think would clean that up just fine. I'll show you that towards the end. But now I'm going to apply my shadows on the bigger forms. So I'm going to lay this back over there. And again, it's just some hatch work. So I'm going to kind of really, really lightly at first define some of those main shadows. So it's a pretty harsh highlight over here. There's some shadow underneath. There's some line work this way. All of my lines should follow the form. Remember, that's the whole point. We're paying attention to form. So any lines that I'm making are following the form of the object. And if they're not following the form of the object, they are wrong. But all objects have two directions for form. So this one I'm going kind of vertically. Curves down and around. Anytime you have something that overlaps, you want to add just a little bit of shadow there as well. And then over here, I've got some underneath, but over on this side, I'm going to do it on the top. A little bit of value information there. Make sure we've got that nice shadow in the center. Kind of gradiate. And then over here, same thing. We've got values down here at the bottom. So I'm just going to overlay some line work. Pairs is a little bit different because you've got this shadow here in the middle. And then you've got this nice highlight up here. But you also kind of have a highlight down here at the bottom. So I'm going to follow that form. Try to avoid my highlights. Also, I'm going to try to avoid adding too much shadow because then our texture kind of gets lost. Okay, so here is that without the picture behind it, so you can kind of go in and add or blend wherever you feel like you need to. I'm going to add some more down here. And then remember that some of your textures have individual shadows. So like you can go back in and pull in individual shadows from between your textures if you feel like you need to, just to bring the textures back out just a little bit. Okay, and I'm done with my textures. I'm going to bring it back out again, and then if you haven't already, you should go watch the video on your background because we are going to use watercolor for our background. So this is going to sit nicely on that watercolor. But before we do that, we are going to paint our objects. So you should have, and if you haven't, you need to do so now, written your name in the lower right-hand corner because we need to visually be able to assess whether it is right side up or upside down. And we are going to paint the back side of our textures before we lay it on our background. So I'm going to flip it over. That's going to be a new video. Okay, for this part, you do need to make sure that you are working on the back side of the acetate. So this is not the side with the Sharpie on it. The Sharpie is on this side, and I can tell because my name is backwards. Okay, so pay attention to those things. Make sure you're working on the back. It is very important to work on the back because if you paint over the Sharpie, you're not going to be able to see it, and it's going to peel up the Sharpie, and they're not going to interact well. So paint on the back, Sharpie on the front, paint on the back. You can tell by how I wrote my name. So my name is on the front, so because it's backwards, I know I'm on the back. Also for this, you want to limit yourself with colors. You do not want to paint every object a different color. And the other thing is you don't really want to use really dark colors. If you're mixing your own colors, you need to mix them, just mix all of them ahead of time so that you can have them and it'll paint kind of quickly. Use a palette. You do not need a lot of paint. We're only painting our objects, so we're not going to paint the ground and we're not going to paint the background. And it is a small piece of paper. I have way too much paint, so very minimal amount of paint required here. And we're also only going to use one flat color. So we're just going to paint the whole object one color. We're not going to add any value information to our painting, okay? So I chose this pink, this gold, and this green color, and I'm just going to start painting. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are painting the object, right? So you want to make sure that you're not going outside of the lines. We want to be pretty precise and controlled with our paints. So I'm going to go slow. This gold, I can already tell, was a bad choice because it's not really covering well. So I might take it off and paint something else here. I think actually what I would like is this gold on this cup. Maybe it'll like give it kind of a see-through effect when we do our foreground and our background. So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears. I'm going to let that dry and clean that off later and paint something else. So I'm painting slow. I want it to be even. I want to make sure that all my brush strokes are going in the direction and the form. Remember, same rules apply as if you were adding the texture, or the texture and the value. You want to, because you're going to be able to see all of your brush strokes in the end, so you want to make sure your brush strokes are going in the direction of the object. So I'm kind of making mine go around the top of this cup. Okay, and I'm going to go fill this in. So like I said, this gold is really transparent. One thing you can do to solve that problem is just add more paint. Like I don't have to spread it out as thin as I was spreading it. But I think I'm going to play with that transparency to make it look a little bit see-through on top of our. So right now, I'm just going around this edge to try to make sure that I have it all painted. I'm going to spread it out this way, going down the cup this time. Going the form of the cup this way. And you really just want to make sure that you are controlling your brush and you're not painting outside of the lines. Go slow, use a small brush. This is detail work. Make it nice and neat. Try to spread this out to make it neater, and then I'm going to let it dry before I do another. That this is also part of that cut. And object. clean my brush off, and I'm going to clean this part off, and then I'm going to come back and paint the rest of it. Okay? So to clean off this paint, I'm really just going to get a little bit of water and rub with a paper towel, kind of scratching off that paint that I don't want. It's really easy because it's on plastic, so paint doesn't really stick to the plastic very well. And plastic's really easy to get wet without ruining it, which is nice. A perk to working with the acetate. But I'm going to go right along this edge. I want to make sure I get it all nice and clean. Using my fingernail to remove that paint. You can check to make sure it's all removed if you've got a white background. So I think it looks pretty good. All right, so now I'm going to paint with my other colors. And you can paint your colors wherever you want. You're making that choice. But just make sure you're using one color, like, for the whole object. So don't switch colors. This green looks good. As you can see, my brush strokes are very apparent. So if I was really messy inside of here, it would show. You want to make sure that your brush strokes are also kind of informing that form. They should be going essentially one direction as much as possible, but that direction should be along the edge of that form or in the direction of the form. I'm going to kind of go and smooth some of my lines out, and then this side is a little bit skinnier, so I need to be a little bit more precise. You're always welcome to use a smaller brush. Most of the brushes that I provided for you in your toolbox are pretty small already, so it shouldn't be a problem. want to be careful. You want to be careful when you're painting wet paint right up against other wet paint because it'll like grab on and pull it into your color. So you don't want that. So you can either wait until it dries or you can just be super, super careful. If it's dry, you don't have to be as careful. It won't kind of bleed into your color. Now I'm just going over what I've already done just to clean it up, make sure that it's nice and smooth. first coat is done, you do have to set it aside and let it dry. Do not, flip it over or anything and lay it down because that paint is wet. But you can let it dry, and then you can do as many coats as you feel like you need to do in order to get the color that you're looking for. So I'm not going to set this down, but I can already tell that I'm going to need to go over some of that green under the pear. I kind of like the pink as it is, so I might leave it that way. I don't know. We'll see. Stay tuned for the following video to talk about how to create the foreground with your scrapbook paper, and then how we are going to eventually put this on our watercolor paper. Oh, look at that. Oh, it's so good. Okay. Okay, so at this point, my background is dry. I'm going to move forward, even though I haven't gotten all the layers that I want, but that's okay. I want to show you the next step here. And we should not need our picture anymore. So we've already gotten our textures on our objects, which is really what we needed our image below for in order to see some of that value information. So we're kind of done with this. So the easiest way to create foreground out of our scrapbook paper is to cut up our original. So I'm going to cut all of my foreground out. So I'm going to just guess back here because I can't see it, but I can see it there, and I know it comes over here, and then I'm going to come that direction with it. And it doesn't have to be like super precise, but you do want it to be close. So then this is going to go over here, and I'm going to come out this other side, and that is my foreground. Then what you need to do, or what you can do, is you can draw it on the back of your paper, okay? So I want it to, this is the way it should be facing. So I'm going to draw it on the back, but I'm also going to flip my paper over to the back so that I can make sure that I'm orientating my cutout the way it should be, so it's not backwards. And I'm just tracing lined up. Off that side. And then I'll cut it out again. Okay. Cut this off because I don't need this part. It's mine. I also know I don't need this side too. So it's perforated. All right, so this should be a little bit bigger than our original. So I want to kind of place it where it belongs in here. And then I'm going to make some marks so that I can kind of, this is the edge of my paper. This is the edge down here. Oops, sorry. This is the edge on the bottom, and then I'll just cut it so that it is the size. Okay, that's all fresh. So now I have my foreground, I have my middle ground, which my foreground should align with, And I have my background. Okay, and that's how it all goes together. You could use glue sticks to stick it all together, and I'll show you that real quick. If you don't have glue sticks, just turn it in like this, and then I can put it all together for you, but it should all fit pretty nicely. So I'm going to kind of hold this in the middle and put a little glue on the side. Put it up on this side, a little glue in the corner. Pull that out there. And the center this on my background paper. So when I frame it, it'll all fit in the frame. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Put a little glue in the corners. A little glue up here. I just realized that I wanted this white to be at the bottom, so I'm gonna flip it before I get too far in. That way I can have I don't see that blank space that I left. Again, add more glue. So I'm holding it in the middle, and then I'm kind of squeegeeing it out towards the glue. I want to make sure that there's no wrinkles. And there it is, mixed media. I will frame these and put them in the art show for you. When you are finished with your project, make sure that you go on Moodle and fill out the artist statement, and then keep all of this together and turn it in as one packet. Okay, thanks.